Hi, my name is Larry Kearns, and this is an overview of this TrackerSled prototype. The prototype is built out of full-scale components, but is scaled down. The final sled will be at least twice as wide, perhaps 2.5 times as wide, and it'll be 20 times as long. And the sled is comprised of ballast tanks at the bottom that act as skis, or pontoons, you can think of them as. The structure that keeps the skis in parallel with one another. And then actually a solar tracker that hosts the PV modules. We'll take a break now, come on down, and do a walk around. Okay, so now we can do a quick walk around. We'll start from the top down this time. Again, these are 72 cell modules, solar panel modules. Each one of these squares, clipped squares, comprises a cell. Unique thing about these are they're bifacial, so they're able to produce power on both sides of the panel. This is critical for the TrackerSled model because we want regenerative farms to be solar producers in winter when the reflectivity of the snow will allow greater gains in the panel. You'll see at this point I don't have a commercial tracker mounted. Components here are comprised of all aluminum for its lightweight. These are these components, both the post and the torque tube here, are both comprised of T-slot framing, which is sort of a universally easy component to build from. The posts I originally had much lower, but the reality is we want to be able to grow cover crops underneath these panels without disrupting the energy that they can gain. So we want to be able to rotate the panel 60 degrees off vertical both ways, so it can follow the sun throughout the day. It's tracking throughout the day, so then it can also be at an angle 60 degrees off the vertical in both orientations. This gives us a good view of the torque tube. Now we have 3 panels here. The ultimate sled will be 20 times as long as what you're seeing here. And periodically there will be bearings. The bearings rest on the posts. Now this is a corner block. Again, we talked about these being entertainment trusses. Each one of these 10-foot long trusses weighs 68 pounds. In fact, I was able to build this entire prototype by myself because each one of these components can be lifted by a single person. In fact, commercial PV modules are sized so they can be lifted by one person. Right at this point, we have sort of a custom-built base, the homemade trunnion, as I mentioned. This post is pretty much oriented so that the rotation point of the panels is about eye height. This will give us about a full 3 feet in the final sled to have cover crops be that high without disrupting at all or shading the panel, and that's critical. So these compact box trusses work pretty well to that effect. They're 12 inches high by 12 inches wide. The actual structural configuration is oriented for a purely vertical load here. The final design will have to be able to resist loads that are coming in both directions. The wind is our big structural foe here. The panels, when they're moved or when there's high winds, they'll go into a stowed position, which will largely be horizontal, so the wind can just blow through the entire sled. That, of course, in an everyday circumstance, you'll still have wind acting on the panels. If there was a windstorm and a detection of strong winds, they'd go to the stowed position as well, or they'd be stowed when they're moved. But largely, they'll be tracking throughout the day. We have 3 structural forces we're dealing with. One is that horizontal force from the wind. Now that can possibly cause the sled to overturn, but part of the idea of locating these trusses also to connect the two skis together is so that it'll be virtually impossible for strong winds to completely overturn the sled, given that wide base. It's sort of like you would think of a wheelbase on a car. The wider, the more stable it is. Same case is true here. However, we still have this issue of sliding. And from one point of view, we want the skis, the bottom of these tanks, to be smooth and slippery so they can glide across the terrain. But going in this orientation, right, crossways, we might want to put cleats or even small skids on there to prevent the panels, the entire sled from sliding. That's still something we're working out. These tanks are repurposed from the marine industry to hold fuel. They each take 111 gallons. The final tanks that we'll use here are going to be, instead of paired, they'll be long singular tanks 6 inches higher. They're filled with ballast, and the ballast that'll be used here is largely water with some sort of antifreeze. It'll be comparable to the ballast that a farmer would put in their tractor tires and their rear tires, and this could be something coming from the sugar beet industry or a glycol or an alcohol, something to keep that water from freezing throughout the winter, because again, this is a year-round proposition here. We want to generate energy year-round. You can see a little bit of an issue we had yesterday when we did a pull test. As we continue to do further pull tests, we can see that the nose here of that tank is beginning to act like a plow. Clearly, in the final design, we'll have a nose on these tanks that'll help us avoid this sort of situation. Again, we want almost to be like a sled where we have turned up ends or something aerodynamic, almost like a pontoon on a lake boat where you're going to see that turn up so that we don't encounter that situation. So we'll have other videos. Our next series of videos is going to be exactly on the ballasting and how we move the sleds, and our proposals for moving ballast water from sled to sled. More later.